Now, when we asked you about weight last week, you did not go into any calculations about the difference between the standard arm, 11.86, and the 9.38, did you?
I don't believe we did, no.
In fact, when you testified last week, at the end of the day, you were asked questions by Attorney Jackson about the weight of that arm, correct?
Yes.
And when you were asked about the weight of the arm, Attorney Jackson asked you if you were asked a lot of questions about the difference in the weight of the arm, about 11.8 pounds statistically as it relates to Mr. O'Keefe versus 9.4 pounds. Do you remember him asking you about that?
Yes.
And you were asked whether you were aware whether anybody had measured the weight of John O'Keefe's right arm. And you responded, I'm not aware of that, no. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
And then you were asked, when you asked questions about whether or not his arm was 11.8 pounds, are you aware of anybody ever just weighing just his arm? And you said no.
Correct.
And finally, you were asked, what is that based on, 11.8? Where did that come from? Remember what you said?
Yes.
I don't know. Remember you answered Attorney Jackson and you said, I don't know where that came from.
Right, referring to, I don't know what source you pulled that 11.8 from.
Uh-huh. And so you were suggesting that that is just a number pulled out of thin air, right? Was that a surprising estimate, 11.8 to you?
I don't know that it was surprising. I don't know what your source is for it.
Well, when you engage in accident reconstruction, you never just take somebody's limb and sever it and throw it on a scale, do you?
I'm not usually doing that part of the analysis, no.
So when you're relying on body weight and different parts of the body, there is strong statistical studies that give you a guide, isn't there?
I would agree with that, yes.
Well, the number's just on the thin air. If you're doing a study and you have to figure out damage to an arm or a foot or a leg, and you have to come to an estimated value or weight, you have to get that information from somewhere, don't you?
I would agree, yes.
So you just make it up out of thin air. You have to find a resource, a reliable, vetted resource. True?
I would agree.
And that's what you do.
In some instances, yes.
Well, in this case, you chose an arm that was 9.38 pounds. Where did you get the support that the 216-pound, 6'1" man would have an arm that weighs 9.38 pounds? Where did you get that from?
Well, it's conservative from the standpoint, if you think about one of the equations we talked about last week, force is equal to mass times acceleration. So if we take the acceleration data from our test and we multiply it by a lighter mass, the 9.38 pounds, it's less force to the arm. So now if you want to increase the mass of the arm, you're now talking about a greater net force to the arm. So it's conservative from a force perspective.
Put aside your story about the force perspective. My specific question is...
So it's sustained. Ask the question differently.
I'll ask you again, Doctor. Tell us where you got the 9.38 pound value from when considering a 6'1", 216-pound man. Where did you get that from so you could be statistically accurate?
It is the mass of the hybrid 3-arm. We saw the photograph that depicted the weight. Again, how you account for that when you're doing the force calculations is you would utilize the acceleration data that we measured, and then you would apply a different mass, in this case, a heavier arm. And I will note, it's the same thing that Dr. Welcher did in his drop test with the hybrid 3 head. He ultimately measured the acceleration of the head, and then to calculate the force, he adjusted the mass of according to Mr. John O'Keefe's mass of his head.
So for the third time, I'm going to ask you just a very simple question. Dumb it down for me if you can, okay, Doctor? Where did you get the source to legitimize using a 9.38 pound arm for a person that's 6'1", 216 pounds? Where is your source to say that arm is validated for use for that size man? Where is that?
Again, it's the weight of the ATD arm. That is what the 50th percentile arm weighs. As I mentioned, in our field, it's accepted to utilize the acceleration data, and then you adjust the force based upon an increase in mass.
Is that your answer?
Yes.
Mr. O'Keefe's body weight and size does not put him in the 50th percentile like the 9.38 arm. He's closer to the 95 percentile. Isn't that fair to say?
Correct.
And there is, in fact, a 95 percentile crash test dummy, isn't there?
There is, yes.
Yeah. You chose the 50th percentile, which is shorter, yes?
Correct.
Weighs less, yes?
Correct.
And the arm weighs less. True?
Correct.
The truth is, you have absolutely no study, no paper, no article that supports using a 9.38 arm for a 216-pound man who's 6'1". You have not one reference or study you can offer us right now, do you?
I don't agree with that because, again, if you look how Dr. Welcher did it, he used the 50th percentile in his drop test with the head, and to calculate the force, he adjusted for Mr. John O'Keefe's mass of the head. Same thing is done in this instance with the lighter arm. We adjust for that in the calculations.
So you have one paper, one study. I know the answer to this, but let me ask. You have one paper, one study to support that it is appropriate to use the 50th percentile 9.38 arm for a person who is 6'1", 216 pounds. I won't ask you again, but if you can answer this once for me. Do you have one paper, one study?
So I'll take out the commentary. Can you answer that? Well, answer that question, please.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
You have one paper. Give me a name, an author. One paper, one study that supports using a 9.38 arm, 50th percentile, when you're doing a crash test for somebody who's in the 95th percentile who weighs 216 pounds and is 6'1". One paper, sir.
I don't have a paper because Dr. Rentschler is addressing the forces and the injuries to the arm.
You talked about, however, would you come up with the number 11.8? Like it was something that is curious or foreign to you, right?
Objection.
Sustained.
Are you confused how the number 11.8 would come up?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
I'm not confused. I don't know your source for it.
When you do studies, would you agree that the head has a similar weight to the arm and that the weight of an arm would be about 5.48% of a person's body weight?
I'm sure that there's various studies out there that talk about that. Could be one particular study.
Well, let's talk about one study. What do you think? You're the engineer, you're the expert. When you're weighing an arm by percent, what is the percent of the arm of the total body weight?
I don't know as I sit here today off the top of my head, no.
I'm sorry?
I don't know as I sit here today off the top of my head.
Well, if you don't know the percent of body weight of the arm compared to the whole body, how would you ever come up with a number for the arm?
Well, from the work that I've done with Dr. Rentschler in this case dating back to last year, it's my understanding that his calculation for the arm was approximately 11 pounds.
So you're relying on somebody else's study? You're doing an independent assessment of the evidence, and you're relying on other people's math? Is that what you're telling us?
I don't agree with that because, as I've mentioned numerous times, Dr. Rentschler and I worked as a team on this case. You can't separate the reconstruction part from the biomechanical part. It's an integral part that works together on it.
Would you agree that the arm is about statistically vetted, that it's 5.48% of the total body weight? Would you agree with that?
It sounds about right, but again, I don't have the percentage off the top of my head.
So if you take 5.48% of a 171-pound man, which is the crash test dummy you were using, the 50th percentile, what do you get?
You said 5.48%?
Yeah.
Just over 9 pounds.
Okay. Close to 9.38?
9.37.
Okay. Now when you have 216 pounds, 5.48%.
11.8.
11.8. Sound about right, doctor?
By that calculation, yes.
Okay. Now, you said you had some confusion where I'd get that number from, this 11.8. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And when I threw out that number, is that the first time you heard of that number?
The 11.8?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or 11, is that the first time you heard of it from anybody, 11 pounds? Is that a new number to you?
I don't understand your question.
Well, you're saying that when Attorney Jackson asked you, where did Brennan get those numbers from, you said, I don't know. Remember that on
Correct.
Friday? Do you know where I got the number 11 pounds from?
11.8
Yeah.
or 11?
11.
As I just mentioned, last year, I believe I testified in a previous proceeding that it was about 11 pounds.
Yes. Your testimony, 11 pounds. Your prior testimony, right? You
Yes,
testified before under oath in this case, didn't you?
correct.
And when you testified under oath and you were giving a general estimate about the pounds of Mr. O'Keefe's arm, based on your experience and your training, you said it was around 11 pounds. Those are your words, right?
Correct, yes.
Under oath.
Yes.
Right. You can't delete something that's under oath, right?
Objection.
Sustained.
And so when you feigned confusion on Friday about this 11 pounds,
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
so when you answered questions last Friday about wherever this 11.8 pounds came from, you weren't so confused about that because you've used 11 pounds before yourself, haven't you?
Yes, but again, I don't know where you got that 11.8 from, so.
Well, we just... Okay. And you used the calculator to help you, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Calculator works.
Yes.
Okay. You said you wouldn't calculate the difference, but you did. And so what you just went through this exercise is you divided that difference, that 2.48 pound difference, right?
Correct.
And then you divided it by 11.86. Divide 2.48 by from the 9.38.
Okay.
What percentage do you get?
26.
Would you agree with this statement about whether the arm and body weight, comparing the weight of the head to the arm, would you agree that the head and arm are actually almost identical because your arm, just one of your arms, including the hand, forearm, and upper arm, is about 5% of your total body weight? So for someone who weighs 216 pounds, that's about 10.8 pounds. Would you agree with that?
I didn't do that calculation, so I
Didn't ask you. I'm asking if you would agree with that.
can you repeat the question, please?
Objection, Your Honor.
So ask the question.
Does the arm weight weigh the same as the head? Or the arm does weigh the same as the head, almost identical because your arm, just one of the arms, including the hand, forearm, and upper arm, is about 5% of your total body weight. So for someone who weighs 216 pounds, that comes out to about 10.8 pounds. Would you agree with that?
I haven't done the calculation, but if the math checks, then yes.
Okay. Would you agree with this statement? The heavier the object, if it gets hit center mass, that's going to be even greater force because that is more mass than just 11 pounds. So the acceleration is the same for each body part. It just depends on the weight of the body part and how heavy it is to determine the force that's actually exerted on the body. Do you agree with that?
Objection.
I'm
Source.
going to allow the question.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, and I think I described that a little bit earlier, is you would increase the mass, you multiply it by the acceleration, that's going to increase your force. Force is equal to mass times acceleration.
Right. So mass has a direct correlation to force. So therefore, the heavier the object, if it's colliding at the same speed, will create more force than a lighter object. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Correct, more force on the arm, yes.
Right. So weight matters, doesn't it, sir?
Yes.
Force is mass times acceleration. So if the arm weighs the same as the head, you're still going to get the same force. And so inevitably, you change the mass, you change the weight, same speed, it changes the amount of force.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay. When you did calculations in this case, you never took the estimate of 11 pounds, although it didn't exactly calculate the 5.48. You never took that 11 pounds and determined the percentage difference between the mass in that arm and the mass in a 9.38 pound arm, did you?
No, I did not.
You didn't include it in any of your PowerPoints.
No.
You didn't explain it to the jury that there's a difference in weight matters.
Again, that's something that Dr. Rentschler is going to discuss.
I'm asking you because you testified, you gave opinions, you got a PowerPoint. Did you explain to the jury about the difference in force when there's a change in weight? When you did all your PowerPoint and calculations, did you break it down for them?
Well, I think it was certainly stated. I mean, I know that we went over Newton's second law, force is equal to mass times acceleration, right? So if you increase that mass number, it will increase the force.
When you were putting up your PowerPoints with the speeds, did you explain to us that there's a difference when you changed the mass so that if you used a lighter arm, there would be a difference in force? Did you explain that to us in any of your slides?
I don't know that I explicitly stated it, but again, that's why we went up to 29 miles per hour to account for that difference in weight.
Were you trying to inflate the force for the speed of test so it looked like the collision had to happen at a faster speed to cause a certain amount of damage? Were you doing that intentionally?
No.
You didn't overstate the mass. You didn't use an arm that was 14 pounds that would have created the opposite illusion, right? You used a weight that was lighter than Mr. O'Keefe's estimated arm.
Right, because again, it goes both ways. If you increase the mass of the arm, you increase the force on the arm. So there's going to be more force acting on the arm.
Let's talk about your studies with Mr. O'Keefe's sweatshirt and his arm, and you gave some opinions about what you would expect for damage to his arm. When I asked you on Friday whether you had any support, any vetted journals, learned treatise, any support whatsoever about whether you should use a crash test dummy arm for these types of studies, you didn't have any support on Friday. Do you have any today that you can refer to?
No.